Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. One additional aspect of Pausanius' speech in the Symposium that's particularly interesting and which I think has a lot of implications for our own time and our culture is his references to what we can call paradoxes of love. Paradoxes of erotic or romantic love, the love of desire. Now, he has in mind what's going on in Athens because, as I pointed out in another core concept video, he thinks that the other Greek city-states are, sort of like in Goldilocks' story, they're too much or too little. They're very simple in their approach to erotic relations, particularly between an older and a younger man, where there's a power imbalance going on. Either they rule it out altogether or they let too many things go. They just say, hey, it's just fine. In Athens, he says, the laws are more complex and people get confused about this, and he's going to point out what is actually confusing about this. But I think that we can extend this not only into our own culture, but these are the sort of things that come up in respect of erotic or romantic love throughout time and throughout history. These are interesting, we might say, points of confusion. So the context with this is relationships in where there's, you might say, a power imbalance. There's an imbalance in age. There's an older who's the lover and a younger who's the beloved. But I think that what we're seeing here could also apply to relationships where they're on a much more reciprocal or equal ground with each other. So he brings up certain maxims, and these are kind of interesting. There's this maxim, it's better to love openly than in secret, particularly if the person that you're loving is somebody who's considered, to have a good reputation, to be honorable, to have certain gifts, even if they're not really physically attractive. The sort of people that we will say, well, look, I'm in love with that person because I love their brain, their intellect, their ability to make things happen. Is there anything necessarily paradoxical about that? Insofar as we're, as he's pointing out, look, normally we'd be attracted to those who are good looking, but, we get attracted to other people for other reasons. That's not really so paradoxical for Pausanius, although that is paradoxical for some people. That's just sort of the lead-in. Here's where it gets a lot more interesting. The lover is encouraged or even applauded. And think about the way in which we look at lovers, not only in our day-to-day life and in sort of public situations, but particularly in terms of our cultural products. Think about romantic comedies. Think about sitcoms. Think about love songs. Think about the ways in which we portray these people. And he says the lover is encouraged or applauded for engaging in conduct that would, in other circumstances or with other motivations, not be seen as so good. And here, it's actually worth looking at some of the examples that he brings up. He says, imagine what would happen to a man who wanted to get money out of someone, or a position, or powers of some kind, some authority, and who therefore thought it fit to behave as the lover behaves towards his beloved. When somebody is displaying the kind of affection, the kind of infatuation, the kind of attraction that we sum up under this word love, we cut them a certain slack that we wouldn't if the motive was just to try to get some money out of somebody. If we'd say somebody like that's a con man, right? So they're an operator. or if they're trying to get a position out of somebody. As a matter of fact, they may pretend to be a lover or try to seduce the other into loving them so that they can get the position, so that they can get access to their wealth, their money, or power. When people engage in that sort of thing, think about a student doing anything for a grade, anything with the, significant quotes. We look at that as being, kind of tawdry and a sign of bad character. But we allow people to do all sorts of things for love that from, other perspectives are really not a good idea. Think about all the money, all the wealth that gets thrown into grand romantic gestures. People look at that and they're like, yeah, makes good sense. Think about, here's a great example, think about all the money that we spend on weddings, which usually happen at a long enough distance in time for both partners to get kind of ticked off with all the preparations that have to take place. But it seemed like a good idea at the time. If this was done for any other motive, Pausanius is saying, we would say, what the hell is wrong with you? You're doing the wrong thing. But when the lover does it, then we're like, oh, good job. Keep it up. Do more of that. So that seems rather paradoxical. What are some of the other things that a lover does that he gives example? Urging his need with prayers and entreaties, begging people. You go around begging people for money, you're a beggar, right? You go around begging people for a position, again, that's seen as rather unseemly, right? Doing anything that it takes to get the job, maybe you're not the right person for the job in that case. But lovers are made to jump through all sorts of hoops by the objects of their affection, and they'll do it. And we say that's just fine. As a matter of fact, that's the way it ought to be. Now we know you really love them, right? Vowing vows, sleeping upon doorsteps. You might think of that classic scene, I think it's in Say Anything, that's been turned into a meme so many times with the boombox and John Cusack, who I like very much as an actor, not quite so much in that scene, playing the song. That's the sort of stuff that Pausanius has in mind. And he's saying, this is ridiculous behavior. If you did that in any other circumstance, people would think that you're a complete nut. He goes on and he says, in short, to a slavery which no slave would endure. So it's a slavery worse than normal slavery. And yet the lover is encouraged in this by other people. Well, that's rather paradoxical. There's a conundrum there, right? Further, lovers, so the lover hasn't gotten much out of the deal on this end so far, right? Now the lover gets something of his or her own. The lover gets to break promises. As a matter of fact, there's this great line in there. Lovers' promises are aphrodision horkon, right? Horkos is an oath. Aphrodision means of Aphrodite, of the things that have to do with erotic relationships, with sexuality, with all of this stuff that we would call romance, right? The line is literally, there is no lover's vow. Why? Because as soon as a lover says some sort of promise, you can be sure that they're probably going to forget about it or it's not going to apply. They get to do this. Try that in finance. You put your name on a contract, you actually sign it, you don't fulfill it, you'll be in court, right? And nobody's going to be able to say, well, I didn't really mean it at the time, unless they're under duress. The lover gets to make and break vows, and people think that's okay, including the beloved and the lover. The beloved might actually justify that to their friends or their parents or to the friends and relatives of the lover and say, oh, it's okay that he or she didn't come through on this because it's the relationship that matters. So that's a paradox as well. Here's another paradox. If love is so good, if it's so ennobling, if it's so wonderful that we cut people slack when they're feeling it, then why do parents try to keep the lover from any sort of access to their child as the beloved? If it's such a great thing, why aren't they like, hey, it's sort of like taking swim lessons. It's better than being thrown into the deep end. Go ahead and date all you want. Instead, parents actually restrict that sort of stuff. A lot of parents are like, well, you're not dating until you're 16 or sometimes, 18 or whatever. You're not dating while you're under my roof. You're not engaging in these sorts of relationships. Kids find all sorts of ways to circumvent that. Social media and texting has, introduced all sorts of new wrinkles into that. But if you read ancient Greek literature and ancient Roman literature, actually the ancient literature of most places, you will find that young people are extremely enterprising in figuring out how to get around parental restrictions. And why are those parental restrictions there in the first place? Because it's felt that love is not entirely good. There's something dangerous about this. There's something that we want to put off until somebody's really able to handle it. Some parents may actually try to keep their children from ever falling in love. They don't allow them the sort of freedom to do that. Why is that the case? Well, again, we're dealing with a paradox. Another paradox that he brings up, which is, again, perfectly applicable to our own time, the person who is, apparent as a beloved because somebody else loves them and then maybe makes a gesture or something like that, their friends, their peers, make fun of them. Oh, so-and-so's got a boyfriend, so-and-so's got a girlfriend. Some flowers come. Oh, who are those from? Why don't you tell the rest of us? Then people blush and they want to cover it up and hide it. And, now notice this goes back to the original maxim, better to love openly, right? Well, is it better to love openly or is it better to make some secrets about this? People engaging in what we call PDA, public displays of affection. They might get made fun of for doing that sort of thing. Somebody, think back to like high school, I'm not even sure if they do this sort of thing. Somebody passes a note. By the time the note gets to its intended person, other people are looking at them and saying, aha, there's something going on there, right? So again, if love is supposed to be this really great thing that ennobles us, that brings out the best in us, that gets us all, charged up, that we cut all sorts of slack for, why do we make fun of people when, they're not even the one who's loving, but just the one who is the object of somebody else's love and desire? Now, there's one other paradox, or at least seeming paradox, that I want to bring up that has to do with Pausanius' own presentation. He talked about it being okay to submit to the noble lover, right? The person who will actually, in a relationship with you, make you into a better person, who's not just interested in dating you or screwing you or, having you on their arm or something like that, displaying you. The person who is genuinely concerned with you, who feels genuine affection, for whom the sexual component might even be secondary. He said that was okay. What if you only think that it's the good lover, but it's really the bad lover, and they throw you over? And they break your heart, and they make you look like a fool. Because you gave in to them, you got involved with them in a romantic or even sexual relationship, and then they dumped you. After, doing all sorts of other things. Maybe, cheating on you with your friends, emptying your bank accounts, sullying your good name, pick whatever you like. Was that a bad idea? Here's where the paradox, or seeming paradox, comes in. Yes, it was still a good thing to do. Why? Because it shows that the nobility of character that the other person didn't have and that you did have. You were submitting to them. You were getting involved with them because you thought that they were thereby going to ennoble you in a long-term relationship. So you had good reasons. It's still, fundamentally from Pausanias' point of view, a good act, although an unfortunate one that doesn't come to fruition. And the question that you want to ask yourself, is that really a paradox or isn't it? It is a paradox from the perspective of a kind of prudishness, from a very conventional point of view. It's also a paradox for those who don't love according to the good kind of love that Pausanius talks about, which doesn't just look at the body, doesn't just look at the superficial, isn't just for today, isn't just about sexual pleasure, but is about the other person. There are many people who are genuinely incapable of not only sharing that kind of relationship, but even conceiving that that's a real thing. For those people, this will totally be a paradox. But for the person who has nobility within them, even in gestation, even just in development, this probably will not be a paradox. It'll actually be a narrative that could lead to some growth.